I've heard this story told over and over again. I've heard it many times, and I'm sure that's true of you too. And it is somewhat of an inspirational story, isn't it? And it has become part of our Christian ethos. The story of David, little David, defeating this mammoth, this Goliath. Really, if you think about it, this is a pretty gruesome story. It's a war story. It's a story from a war that was fought between Israel and the Philistines. But what we do in church typically, and I think what we do actually as individual believers in our minds, is that we treat it like an allegory. In our minds, we make it less real, less like a war story, and more like a spiritual lesson we can learn. And there is something to be said for the spiritual value that is contained in the story, even though it's set in a war setting. I mean, you could argue that this situation that David faced is a situation that we often face. We do have problems in our lives, things that we feel we can't overcome. And so that's why we can relate to stories like that, and we can take a lesson from it. And actually, I had this whole sermon prepared for you this morning where I wanted to show you the spiritual value of this story. And it is a great spiritual value because David, as young as he was a young shepherd boy, right? He was like 16, 17 years old when this happened. Out of all of the people of Israel, out of all of the army, he was the only one who said, I will fight Goliath. I will fight him. Because he believed that with God, even the impossible, the seemingly impossible, is possible. That's what he believed. So I wanted to show the difference between a belief system that you have, and we all have a belief system. And belief system is really characterized by a set of doctrines that you believe in. It has to do with your rational thinking as well. And I think we capture that pretty well in our Wesleyan quadrilateral, where reason is actually a part of our belief system. You know, it's not just the Bible, it's not just our tradition and experience, is also reason. And so we come up with this belief system. And in the belief system of the people of Israel, it was impossible to beat this enemy, to beat especially this 9-foot Goliath. And he was big, and he was well trained, and he was probably tall. And so in our belief system, we have certain things that are possible and other things that are not possible. But this is the difference between belief and faith. If you look at David, David had actual faith. Because faith is really the cousin of courage. Faith is not necessarily following what you have believed all your life, but faith is actually going beyond that. Something that you act upon that takes you new places, unknown places. Faith will cause you to actually overcome some of your beliefs, the human thinking, and will get you to take risks. And that's what David did. David believed that God could save him and that God could help him against Goliath. So then I was thinking, as I had my sermon almost finished, this terrible thing in France happened, this attack. And I was looking at my sermon again after I had soaked all of this in, all of these news. I was thinking, oh my God, I can't preach this sermon. This is not appropriate for this day because of what happened in Paris. I wish I could rewrite this story. Okay, so here is my version of the story and my version of faith. I wish that David wouldn't have had faith to slay Goliath, which he did. I wish David would have said, what are we doing here? Why are we even fighting? Why can't we get along? Why can't we combine our strengths and help each other? We all have something to offer. The Philistines were great at metalworking. Obviously, they put that gift or those gifts to use to produce armor and swords and all kinds of war equipment. But why Why didn't David think of approaching them and saying, look, we all have something to contribute. We can help each other. We can have a better life if we all just share our resources and this land and live in peace. Why can't we do that? And wouldn't it have been an even better story if then these two warring parties would have gotten together for a potluck and would have sang songs and would have just come up with a solution and would have made peace? How great of a story that would be. Now that would be a Christian story I could believe in. That'd be a Christian story I would really like to share with everybody. Because that's really where our heart is, isn't it? Especially at times like this. We realize that we're part of the problem. We as Christian nations, we're part of the problem. It's not all extremist Muslims. It's something that we cause as well. And if you really think about it, we have done so for centuries. We've been warmongers. This past June, some of us had the opportunity to be at an annual conference. We had an excellent speaker, Professor Tinker, or Tink for short. He teaches at ILIF School of Theology in Colorado, and he is Native American. And he really opened our eyes, all of those pastors and lay people that were at the conference, and he really told us that stories like this really have been causing horrible acts by Christians in this country and in many other countries in the world and in history. And he was sharing with us how his people were slaughtered. I mean slaughtered. And he had all kinds of examples, and he named them, and he named the people by name, and it was shocking. It was done in the name of Christianity because the white folks that came over here believed they had a mandate to take this country no matter what stood in their way. And they eradicated whole people groups, nations, native nations that were living here peacefully for years and decades and centuries. I think we need to rewrite our narrative. And that's actually what Tink challenged us with. He said we need to rewrite the narrative of Christianity. If we truly want to make a difference in this world, if we truly want to be peacemakers as Jesus calls us to be peacemakers, we have to rewrite the narrative. We have to take these stories and we have to say, no, this is how they should have ended. This is what we should do. We should reach out our hand. You know, just recently I actually learned something new in a conversation I had with Ted Schwartz in Minnesota about 3 or 4 weeks ago. We sat at the breakfast table and he said, you know, it's interesting how some of the gestures that have become such commonplace for us, how they're explained and where they come from. He said, you know, actually the handshake, think about the handshake. You actually use your right hand, right, to shake somebody. So most people are right-handed. At a time when you had to hold a weapon at all times because you had to be wary of other people taking what you owned, it was a big deal to put that weapon out of your right hand and extend your hand to another person. That's what we need to do. We need to drop our weapons. What kind of weapons am I talking about? I'm talking about revenge. What was the first response by the French president? Holland is his name, right? He said, we will strike back, and we will do so ruthlessly. That's our human response. We want to strike back. We feel angry, we feel hurt, we feel violated, and our first response, our first human response is, we will take revenge. We will get those guys, and we will kill them, and we'll be gruesome. Doesn't Jesus call us to extend our hand instead and drop those feelings of hatred and revenge and just reach out and say, what can we do? What can we do to get together in peace? What can we do to make peace between us, between our nations, between our religions? Because let's face it, it's not really the religion that is telling us to kill each other. I think we all want the same thing, don't we? We all want to live in peace. We all want to worship God. We all want to be servants, be helpful, be an inspiration, and be inspired by others. We don't want to kill each other. No religion that I know of today is calling people to kill each other. And why do we use religion to hurt each other? Let's be peacemakers. And let's start by examining our heart and by dropping those feelings of hatred, those feelings of revenge. And let's ask God to fill our heart with love and with peace. And let's pray for not only the victims in the French attacks, and of course the French people, and they should be in our prayers, but let's also pray for those who blew themselves up and who shot all those people. And let's pray for the community that's behind them, that feels like they had to take revenge on Westerners. Let's ask God for peace, and let's do our part. I love that Christmas song, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me," because that's where it begins, right here in our heart.